When my daughter-in-law, Camille, dropped a grocery list onto my kitchen counter, I knew immediately that she expected me to obey. The paper landed beside my coffee with a sharp slap. I looked down, 3 pages. Not a few ingredients for dinner, not a simple request for help. It was a complete shopping list for a Thanksgiving celebration that looked expensive enough to feed a small hotel. Organic turkey, imported cheese, specialty desserts, fresh seafood, several bottles of wine, and enough food for approximately 40 people. Camille didn't even look at me as she spoke. "My entire family is coming for Thanksgiving," she announced, scrolling through her phone. "There should be around 40 people." I slowly lifted my eyes toward her. My son, Adrian, was standing near the refrigerator. The moment I looked at him, he shifted uncomfortably. That was never a good sign. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I asked. Camille sighed as if I were making a simple conversation unnecessarily difficult. "You know," she said, "the usual. Shopping, cooking, cleaning, getting the house ready." Then Adrian cleared his throat. "Mom," there it was. I turned toward him. He rubbed the back of his neck and stared at the floor. "Camille's parents are coming too," he said quietly. "They have some back problems, so—" He paused. I waited. "So maybe you could sleep in the garage for a few days?" For several seconds, nobody said anything. The refrigerator hummed behind him. A clock ticked on the wall. Camille continued staring at her phone as if asking the owner of a house to surrender her bedroom and sleep beside lawn equipment was perfectly reasonable. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug. That kitchen had once been the heart of my home. I had chosen every cabinet, paid for every repair, spent 3 decades making mortgage payments, replacing appliances, repainting walls, and maintaining the house after my husband passed away. And now, apparently, I was supposed to relocate to the garage because Camille wanted to impress her relatives. Adrian and Camille had moved in 8 months earlier. Just temporarily, Adrian had promised. They were supposedly between apartments. They needed a little time. A few weeks became 2 months. 2 months became 8. And somewhere along the way, Camille had started behaving as though my house belonged to her. She complained about the groceries I bought, but happily ate them. She criticized my furniture while sitting on it. She invited people over without asking me. And apparently, she had even been telling her family a version of the story where she and Adrian were the successful homeowners. I was merely the older woman living with them. At first, I tried to ignore it. I loved my son. I thought patience would help. I thought supporting him meant giving him room to get back on his feet. But there is a difference between helping someone stand and allowing them to stand on your back. So I took one slow sip of coffee. Then I smiled. "Perfect," I said. Adrian looked up. Camille's fingers stopped moving across her screen. For the first time that morning, both of them were paying attention. I placed my mug gently on the counter. "You two can handle the cooking, the shopping, and the cleaning," I continued. "You can host your guests yourselves." Camille blinked. "What?" "I'll be away for Thanksgiving." Her expression changed immediately, not sadness, not disappointment, confusion. "But," she said, looking at the grocery list, "this is for you." "No," I replied calmly. "It's for whoever plans to cook the meal." Adrian took a step forward. "Mom, don't be like that." I looked directly at him. "Like what?" He had no answer. Camille folded her arms. "You're seriously leaving us with all of this?" I smiled again. "You invited 40 people into a home that you do not own. I think you should be perfectly capable of feeding them." The silence that followed was almost satisfying. Almost I didn't want revenge. I didn't need to scream. I simply wanted one thing: respect. And if they were unwilling to give it to me voluntarily, then perhaps they needed to learn what life looked like without me quietly solving every problem. "Enjoy your holiday," I said. Then I turned around and walked upstairs. Behind me, I heard Camille mutter something under her breath. Adrian said my name. I didn't stop, because I knew exactly what they were thinking. They thought I was bluffing. They assumed I would wake up the next morning, drive to the supermarket, spend my money, cook for 40 strangers, clean the house, and somehow find a way to sleep in the garage without complaining. After all, that was what I had always done. I made things easier. I fixed problems. I kept the peace. But this time, I closed my bedroom door, pulled my travel bag from the closet, and began packing. Not because I was running away, because sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is step aside and let everyone else discover what happens when the person holding everything together finally decides to rest. I woke before sunrise on Tuesday morning, 3 days before Thanksgiving. The house was silent. For a moment, I lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds around me, the heating system clicking on, branches brushing softly against the windows, the faint creak of old floorboards settling beneath the weight of another cold morning. Then I got up. I dressed quietly and pulled my canvas travel bag from the closet. I packed enough clothes for a week, along with my medications, my favorite sweater, and the little folder containing my important documents. I also took my coffee thermos. That might sound like a small thing, but I had learned something over the years. When life becomes chaotic, familiar comforts matter. 2 weeks earlier, after Camille had casually started referring to my bedroom as the spare room, I had made a decision. I called a handyman. He installed a heavy-duty lock on my bedroom door. I hadn't told Adrian. I certainly hadn't told Camille. At the time, I wasn't sure why I felt the need to do it. Maybe some part of me already understood where things were heading. That morning, I locked the door behind me. Then I walked downstairs, stepped outside, and loaded my bag into my car. I didn't leave a note. I didn't write a dramatic goodbye. I had already told them exactly what I intended to do. If they hadn't believed me, that wasn't my responsibility. By 8:30, I was 2 hours away. My oldest friend, Loretta, owned a small cabin near a quiet lake surrounded by tall pine trees. We had known each other for more than 30 years, and unlike some people in my life, Loretta had never confused kindness with weakness. When I pulled into her gravel driveway, she was waiting on the porch with 2 steaming mugs. "You actually did it," she said. "I did." She handed me one of the mugs. "And? And what? Are you feeling guilty?" I took a sip. The tea was hot and strong. I looked across the lake, where a thin layer of morning mist floated over the water. Then I smiled. Not even a little. Loretta laughed. "Good, because I was prepared to give you a speech. You always are." We spent the next hour sitting on her porch. For the first time in months, I wasn't listening for Camille calling my name from another room. I wasn't wondering who had left dishes in the sink. I wasn't planning meals for people who never thanked me. I was simply sitting still. At 9:12, my phone buzzed. Adrian. I looked at the message. "Mom, where are you?" I didn't answer. Less than a minute later, another message appeared. "Camille is looking for smoothie ingredients. Why is the fridge almost empty?" I took another sip of tea. That was the first domino. For 10 days, I had intentionally stopped filling the house with groceries. I bought only enough food for myself, no overflowing freezer, no pantry full of expensive snacks. No emergency ingredients for a meal that Camille might suddenly expect me to prepare. Camille had spent months criticizing my grocery choices. Apparently, she had never considered what would happen if I stopped buying groceries altogether. My phone rang. Adrian. I watched it ring until it stopped. Then another message arrived, this one from Camille. "Where is the turkey?" I almost laughed. A second message appeared immediately. I put the exact turkey I wanted on the list. I typed slowly, "Good morning, Camille. As I explained yesterday, I'm away for Thanksgiving. The supermarket is nearby. I'm sure you can find everything you need." Her response came almost instantly. "With what money?" That question told me everything. I placed my phone face down on the porch table. A few months earlier, I had given Adrian a supplementary card connected to my account. It was meant for emergencies, car trouble, medical expenses, a broken water heater. It was not meant to finance a luxury Thanksgiving dinner for 40 people. But I knew Camille kept that card, and I knew exactly what she would try next. The previous afternoon, before leaving town, I had called my bank and frozen the supplementary card. I hadn't canceled it permanently. I had simply made sure that my definition of an emergency and Camille's definition of one would no longer be confused. Loretta and I went for a walk around the lake. The air was cold enough to make my cheeks sting. Halfway through our walk, I checked my phone. There it was, an attempted charge, $986.47. Declined. I pictured Camille at the checkout counter with 2 overflowing carts. She would have filled them with premium ingredients, expensive desserts, and everything necessary to create the holiday celebration she had promised her family. Then came another attempted charge, $127. 19, declined again. Apparently, she had put some items back and tried to purchase only the essentials. Still no luck. I slipped my phone into my pocket. I didn't feel cruel. I felt free. Back home, the panic was probably beginning to spread. Camille would be angry. Adrian would be confused. And sooner or later, they would both realize something important. The woman they had expected to sleep in the garage had taken the entire safety net with her. And the holiday had only just begun. By Tuesday afternoon, the peaceful silence around Loretta's cabin had become a sharp contrast to the chaos unfolding back at my house. I was sitting beside the lake with a warm blanket across my knees when my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Adrian, Mom. Camille's parents are here. I stared at the message for a moment. They were supposed to arrive the next day. Apparently, that plan had changed. Another message appeared. They want to rest. We can't get into your bedroom. I handed my phone to Loretta. She read the message, raised one eyebrow, and slowly reached for another cookie. Well, she said, that sounds like a personal problem. I laughed harder than I had in weeks. Meanwhile, 2 hours away, my house was becoming the setting for a disaster that neither Adrian nor Camille had prepared for. Camille's parents, Grant and Beverly, had arrived with enough luggage for a luxury vacation. From everything I had heard about them, Beverly was not the kind of woman who handled inconvenience gracefully. She expected things to be arranged before she arrived, preferably exactly the way she wanted them. And according to Camille, everything had been arranged. There was just one small problem. The master bedroom belonged to me. Grant and Beverly had barely entered the house before Beverly started looking around. "Where's our room?" she asked. Adrian carried one of her heavy suitcases upstairs. Camille followed behind him. At the end of the hallway stood my bedroom door. Adrian reached for the handle. He turned it. Nothing. He tried again. Still nothing. Camille stepped forward. "Move." She grabbed the handle and twisted it several times. The lock didn't move. Her parents waited behind her. Beverly crossed her arms. "What seems to be the problem?" Camille forced a smile. "Nothing. The lock is just stuck." Adrian looked at her. Both of them knew perfectly well that the lock wasn't stuck. It was locked by me. Camille pulled out her phone and called me. I watched it ring. Then I silenced it. A few seconds later, Adrian called. I ignored that one too. Loretta looked toward the phone. "Are you going to answer?" "No." "Good." She poured more tea. Back at the house, Camille was running out of options. Eventually, she disappeared downstairs and returned with a butter knife. Adrian stared at her. "What are you doing?" Opening the door. "With a butter knife? Do you have a better idea?" She pushed the knife toward the lock. I wasn't there. But later Adrian told me exactly what happened. Camille twisted the knife. Nothing. She pushed harder. Still nothing. Then she twisted it again. Snap, the tip broke off. For a moment, everyone in the hallway stared at the broken utensil in her hand. Beverly was no longer impressed. "Camille," she said slowly, "why are you trying to break into a bedroom?" Camille's face turned red. "I'm not breaking in. It's our house." The words hung in the air. Grant looked toward Adrian. "Is that true?" Adrian froze. And that was when the story Camille had been telling her family for months began to fall apart. She had made it sound as though she and Adrian owned the house. She had described herself as the woman in charge. She had spoken about hosting Thanksgiving as if every room, every piece of furniture, and every square foot of the property belonged to her. But now her mother was standing in front of a locked bedroom door. A bedroom Camille couldn't enter. A room Adrian couldn't open. A room that apparently belonged to someone else. Grant pointed toward the door. "Whose room is this?" Camille hesitated. "It's," Adrian finally spoke. "My mother's." Beverly slowly turned toward him. "Your mother owns this house?" He swallowed. "Yes." The hallway became very quiet. Camille looked furious, not because Adrian had lied, because he had finally stopped supporting hers. Beverly's eyes narrowed. "So where exactly are we supposed to sleep?" Adrian looked helplessly from his in-laws to Camille. Camille had no answer. The guest room was occupied by boxes. The sofa downstairs was barely large enough for one person. And the master bedroom, the luxurious room Camille had promised her parents, was securely locked. Then Grant asked the question Camille had been trying desperately to avoid. "If this is your mother's house, why isn't she here?" Adrian looked at the floor. "Because we asked her to sleep in the garage." Loretta nearly dropped her mug when I repeated that part to her later. "What did he say?" "You heard me, and they expected her to stay." "Yes." Loretta leaned back in her chair. "I think I officially dislike your daughter-in-law. You and me both." At my house, Beverly stared at Camille in disbelief. "You asked the homeowner to sleep in the garage?" Camille immediately tried to defend herself. It wasn't like that, but the truth was already out. And there was more. There was no food, no turkey, no decorations, no beautifully prepared Thanksgiving meal. Instead, the refrigerator was almost empty, and 40 people were expected within the next 24 hours. Grant looked around the house. Beverly looked at Camille. Adrian stood silently beside the locked door. And for the first time since they had moved into my home, they were beginning to understand something important. They had spent 8 months treating me as though I were invisible, but without me, nothing was working. And downstairs, as the clock moved closer to Thanksgiving, the real disaster was waiting to begin. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and quiet at Loretta's cabin. I woke to the smell of coffee and cinnamon drifting from the kitchen. For a few beautiful seconds, I had forgotten about Adrian, Camille, and the disaster waiting 2 hours away. Then my phone lit up, 6 missed calls, 3 from Adrian, 2 from Camille, and 1 number I didn't recognize. I smiled and turned the phone face down. Loretta glanced at me from across the kitchen table. "Trouble, apparently. Are you going to answer?" I reached for my coffee. "Not today." She nodded approvingly. That was the wonderful thing about old friends. The best ones don't always ask you to explain yourself. Sometimes they simply recognize when you've spent too many years giving and quietly encourage you to stop. While Loretta prepared a small pan of rosemary potatoes, I imagined what was happening at my house. Later, I discovered I hadn't been far off. By late morning, cars had begun filling the street. Camille's relatives arrived in groups, aunts and uncles, cousins, children running through the front door, everyone expecting the enormous Thanksgiving celebration Camille had been promising for months. But the house didn't smell like turkey. It didn't smell like cinnamon, roasted vegetables, or fresh bread. It smelled like stale air, panic, and whatever candle Camille had apparently lit in a desperate attempt to create the illusion of preparation. The oven was cold. The refrigerator was nearly empty. And there was still no turkey. Adrian had apparently spent most of Wednesday trying to save the situation. After realizing that neither my money nor my credit card was available, he called several friends. Eventually, one of them agreed to lend him enough cash to order food. Not a Thanksgiving dinner, not a beautifully prepared feast. Pizza, 10 large boxes of it. According to Adrian, the delivery driver arrived just as the living room became crowded with hungry relatives. The doorbell rang. He opened the door, and there stood a young man holding stacks of cardboard boxes. For a moment, Adrian simply stared at them. Then he took the boxes inside. The room went quiet. One of Camille's cousins looked toward the kitchen. "Where's the turkey?" Camille forced a laugh. "We decided to do something different this year." "Pizza?" someone asked. No one answered. Camille's relatives slowly gathered around the kitchen island. The boxes were opened. Steam rose weakly from the lukewarm slices. A few children were thrilled. Most of the adults were not. And then Monica, one of Camille's aunts, began looking around. Monica was the kind of woman who noticed details other people missed. She looked at the framed photographs throughout the living room. She noticed my name on the envelopes stacked near the counter. She saw the old family portraits. Then she remembered something Beverly had quietly told her earlier. The owner of the house was away because her own son and daughter-in-law had asked her to sleep in the garage. Monica turned toward Camille. "Camille," she said. The room grew quieter. "Yes, I thought you and Adrian bought this house." Camille's smile disappeared. We live here." That wasn't my question. Camille glanced toward Adrian. He was standing near the kitchen doorway, looking as though he wanted the floor to open beneath him. Monica pointed toward one of the photographs. "Who is that woman?" Camille swallowed. "Adrian's mother. And why are her photographs in every room?" Nobody spoke. Monica continued. "And why is her name on the mail? Why does she have a locked bedroom? And why, according to your mother, did you ask her to sleep in the garage?" The truth hit the room like a dropped glass. Sharp, sudden, impossible to ignore. Camille opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Finally, Adrian spoke. "My mother owns the house." The silence that followed was absolute. For 8 months, Camille had built an impressive story. She had talked about the house as though she had purchased it. She had bragged about hosting family events. She had acted as if she and Adrian had created a successful life that everyone should admire. But now, surrounded by 40 people and 10 boxes of pizza, the entire performance had collapsed. One cousin slowly put down his slice. Another looked toward Beverly. Grant shook his head. Camille looked as though she might cry. Then came the question that made everything worse. "So," Monica said quietly, "you asked the woman who owns this house to sleep in the garage so your parents could take her bedroom?" No one defended Camille, not even Beverly, because there are some situations where excuses simply make things uglier. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Adrian. "Mom, please come home. Everything is falling apart." I read it once, then deleted the notification. I wasn't coming home, not to clean up a mess they had created, not to rescue Camille from the consequences of promises she had made, and not to teach 2 grown adults how to host guests they had invited. Instead, Loretta and I prepared our own Thanksgiving dinner: a roasted chicken, garlic potatoes, green beans, fresh bread, and a small pumpkin pie. We ate at a wooden table beside the window as the afternoon sun disappeared behind the trees. There was no arguing. No one complained about the menu. No one expected me to jump up and serve them something different. For the first time in almost a year, I wasn't shrinking myself inside my own life. I was simply enjoying it. Later that evening, I finally turned my phone back on. The messages had stopped. Out of curiosity, I opened my security camera app. Cars were leaving, one after another. Parents gathered their children. Relatives pulled on their coats. Nobody looked particularly happy. Grant and Beverly were among the last to leave. They carried their luggage down the front steps, and neither of them turned back. The grand Thanksgiving celebration Camille had planned for 40 people had lasted less than 3 hours. And with every departing car, one thing became clearer. The people I had spent months supporting had finally learned what happened when I stopped carrying them. I stayed at Loretta's cabin until Sunday afternoon. By then, I had stopped checking my phone every few minutes. The quiet had become normal again. I spent the morning drinking coffee beside the lake, reading a book I had abandoned months earlier, and listening to the wind move through the trees. I realized something during those days away. I had been exhausted long before Thanksgiving. Not physically. Emotionally, every day in my own home had become an exercise in avoiding conflict. If Camille complained, I stayed quiet. If Adrian needed money, I helped. If they made a mess, I cleaned it. If they invited people over, I adjusted. I had convinced myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as being loving. It wasn't. Sometimes keeping the peace simply means allowing someone else to keep taking from you. By Sunday afternoon, I was ready to go home. I drove back slowly, enjoying the familiar roads. When I reached my neighborhood, everything looked strangely quiet. There was only one car in my driveway. Adrian's. I parked and sat behind the wheel for a moment. Then I picked up my purse and walked toward the front door. I unlocked it. The smell hit me immediately. Cold pizza, stale food, something spilled on the kitchen floor. I stepped inside. The house looked as though a small storm had passed through it. Pizza boxes were stacked on the counter. Paper plates were scattered across the living room. Cups sat on nearly every available surface. There were crumbs on the carpet and empty bottles beside the sink. I looked around. This was my home. The same home I had spent years maintaining, and somehow, in less than a year, Adrian and Camille had managed to turn it into a place I barely recognized. I didn't pick up a single thing. I placed my purse on the entry table and waited. A few minutes later, Adrian appeared from the living room. He looked terrible. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes were dark with exhaustion. His shoulders seemed smaller than I remembered. When he saw me, he stopped. "Mom." "Hello." "Adrian." He swallowed. "You're back." "I am." He looked toward the kitchen. "I know it's bad." I said nothing. He rubbed his hands together. "Thanksgiving was a disaster," I heard. "Camille's parents left early." I nodded. "Her relatives aren't speaking to her." Another pause. "She hasn't really left the guest room since Thursday." Still, I said nothing. Finally, Adrian looked directly at me. "We messed up." I waited. "I'm sorry." There it was. The apology I had expected to hear, but instead of hugging him, I simply asked, "What are you sorry for?" He looked confused. "For everything." "That isn't an answer." He sighed. "Mom, we shouldn't have asked you to leave your bedroom." "No." "We shouldn't have expected you to do everything." "No." "And we shouldn't have told people the house was ours. That one mattered." I folded my arms. "No, you shouldn't have." Adrian looked at me with the expression of the little boy I remembered from decades ago. The expression that once would have broken my heart. He was waiting for me to soften, to tell him it was okay, to say that everyone makes mistakes, to offer him another chance. But I had finally understood something. Forgiveness doesn't require continued access. "You have until next Sunday to move out," I said. His face changed instantly. "What?" "You heard me." "Mom, we don't have enough money for another apartment." "That isn't my responsibility." "Where are we supposed to go?" "You're an adult. You'll figure it out." He started pacing. He talked about rent prices. He talked about his job. He talked about how difficult everything had become. He talked about family. I listened. But I didn't change my answer. 7 days. That was all I gave them. "If you need somewhere to sleep while you make arrangements," I said, "the garage is available." Adrian stared at me. I almost smiled. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had once asked me to sleep there because his wife's parents deserved my bedroom. Now I was offering it to him because he needed somewhere to stay. He didn't find it funny. Neither did I, because this wasn't revenge. It was a boundary. Later that evening, Camille finally emerged from the guest room. Her eyes were swollen. She looked at me without speaking. I expected an apology. Instead, she walked past me and began stuffing clothes into a suitcase. I let her. For the first time, her anger didn't frighten me. Her disappointment didn't control me. Her silence didn't make me question myself. I had spent months trying to make 2 grown adults comfortable. Now they could make themselves comfortable somewhere else. By Thursday morning, they were already loading boxes into a rented moving van. They didn't make it to Sunday. Adrian carried the last box outside. He stopped at the end of the driveway and looked back at the house. For a second, I saw regret on his face. Not anger, not resentment, regret. "Mom," he said quietly. I looked at him. "I really am sorry." This time, I believed him, but believing an apology doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. "I know," I said. He nodded. Then he climbed into the driver's seat. Camille sat beside him without looking at me. The van pulled away. I stood there until it disappeared around the corner. Then I went back inside. The house was finally quiet, really quiet. And for the first time, that silence didn't feel lonely. It felt like freedom. The moment Adrian and Camille disappeared around the corner, I closed the front door and stood in the entryway without moving. The silence was different now. For months, silence in that house had meant tension. It meant Camille was upset about something. It meant Adrian was avoiding a difficult conversation. It meant I was wondering what problem I would be expected to solve next. But now there was no tension, no footsteps upstairs, no television playing loudly in the middle of the night, no voice calling from another room, asking where something was, no expectation waiting for me in the kitchen, just silence. And it was beautiful. I picked up my phone and called a locksmith. Within 2 hours, every exterior lock had been replaced. The front door, the back door, the garage entrance. Every key Adrian and Camille had ever possessed was useless. When the locksmith finished, he handed me the new keys. I wrapped my fingers around them and felt something unexpectedly emotional. They were just keys, but they represented something much bigger: my home, my privacy, my peace. I had spent so much time worrying about whether setting boundaries would make me a bad mother that I had forgotten I was allowed to protect what belonged to me. The next morning, I hired a professional cleaning crew. I could have cleaned the house myself. For years I would have. But I had done enough unpaid work for everyone else. This time, I opened the door, showed the crew what needed attention, and stepped aside. They cleaned the kitchen. They scrubbed the floors. They removed the lingering smell of cold pizza and stale food. By the afternoon, the countertops were shining again. The carpets were clean, the windows were open, allowing fresh air to move through every room. I walked slowly from one room to another. For the first time in nearly a year, every space belonged to me again. I didn't have to ask permission to sit in my own living room. I didn't have to schedule my meals around someone else's demands. I didn't have to defend my bedroom. I didn't have to feel like a guest inside the house I had spent 30 years paying for. A week later, I received a message from Adrian. I stared at it for several minutes before opening it. "Mom, we're staying with a friend until we figure things out. I know I hurt you. I'm not asking to move back in. I just want you to know I'm sorry." I read the message twice. Then I put my phone down. This time, I didn't feel anger. I felt sad, not because I regretted my decision. I didn't. But because boundaries sometimes reveal things we spend years trying not to see. I loved my son. I always would. But love couldn't mean allowing him to disrespect me. Love couldn't mean financing his life forever. And love certainly couldn't mean surrendering my dignity just because saying no made him uncomfortable. A few minutes later, I replied, "I love you too. I hope you learn from this. When you're ready to have a respectful relationship, my door will be open for conversation, not the house, the conversation." There was a difference. Camille never contacted me. At first, I wondered whether that bothered me. Then I realized it didn't. An apology only matters when someone understands what they did wrong. Forced apologies and empty words were no longer something I needed. I had spent too much time waiting for people to become grateful. I wasn't going to spend more time waiting for them to become accountable. Instead, I focused on myself. I repainted my bedroom. I rearranged the living room. I bought new curtains for the kitchen. Small changes, perhaps. But every one of them reminded me that I was allowed to make choices without asking anyone else's opinion. A few weeks after Thanksgiving, Loretta came to visit. She walked through the house carrying a bottle of sparkling cider and looked around approvingly. "Much better," she said. I laughed. "You think so?" "Absolutely. It finally looks peaceful." We sat together at the kitchen table. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at me. "Do you regret it?" I thought about Adrian. I thought about Camille. I thought about Thanksgiving, the grocery list, the garage, the locked bedroom, and 40 guests discovering that the woman they had ignored was actually the person holding everything together. Then I shook my head. No. Because I had finally learned something important. Dignity isn't something other people hand to you. You don't earn it by working harder. You don't protect it by begging for appreciation. And you don't keep it by allowing people to cross every line simply because they're family. Dignity is a standard, a boundary, a decision. For too long, I had confused unconditional love with unlimited tolerance. I believed being a good mother meant sacrificing until there was nothing left of me. But real love does not require self-erasure. Helping someone doesn't mean carrying them forever. Supporting someone doesn't mean allowing them to take control of your life. And forgiveness doesn't mean giving someone another opportunity to repeat the same behavior. Sometimes you don't need to scream. You don't need revenge. You don't need to prove that you're right. Sometimes all you need to do is stop rescuing people from the consequences of their own choices. That Thanksgiving, I packed one bag, left my house, and finally stepped away from responsibilities that were never mine to carry. I didn't destroy anyone. I didn't force anyone to fail. I simply stopped making their lives easier at my own expense. And when I returned, I reclaimed more than my house. I reclaimed my peace. So if there is one lesson I will carry with me from that experience, it is this. You can love people deeply and still tell them no. You can forgive them and still keep your distance. You can be kind without becoming their servant. And sometimes, the quietest boundary is the one that changes everything. That day, I stopped funding my own disrespect, and in the end, the house wasn't the only thing I got back. I got myself back too.